Mike Maroney, the CEO of the Association of Farm and Forestry Contractors in Ireland, is here with us now. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Claire.
So, Mike, at the moment there's second cuts going on around the country, and as Peter pointed out in the VT, there's a lot of problems sourcing drivers. How significant is the problem of finding drivers across the country, and what kind of an impact is it having around the country on the ground?
Well, it is significant in terms of availability of drivers, because what we're tending to find, and it's across a lot of other industries, and it's even across Europe as well, less people seem to want to drive tractors and machinery than in the past. Traditionally, we kind of felt that young lads would like to be driving tractors. There's a buzz attached to that sector, but there seems to be a change in mindset. And what's happening is that it's more difficult to get people who are willing to drive machines. And as well as that, it's even more difficult to get younger people with experience, because many of them haven't driven machines. And in some of the agricultural colleges, they have limited exposure to actually driving the machines. So whatever the experience they will get, they'll get it at home.
So what would you say are the main drivers there to the fall off as to why this is happening?
It's a difficult one to answer, but it is essentially a society change. And for example, we've come back this week from a meeting of CETAR, the European Contractors Association, and the contractors in Holland and in Germany and in France are all experiencing the same thing. So younger people now are spending less time doing vocational practical work, and they're spending more time on computer type work, and they haven't developed the skills, and even they haven't developed a desire to be driving machines in the same way as in the past. For example, if we take the Dutch example, the Dutch Contractors Association provides an information campaign, not to third level and not even to second level children, but they actually into primary school children, explaining what a tractor is, trying to get children to be kind of comfortable, to be friendly towards a tractor, because what they find is that a lot of families don't want any association with this type of area. Now, we're not having the same experience as such, but it is a trend, and it's a trend throughout Europe. Less people wanting to drive machines such as this, even though your modern tractor has so much technology. You'd imagine that young people, guys in particular, would like to be involved in it, but they seemingly haven't. And I've often told the story about one of our members early last year, and he had a new tractor, a new baler with all the equipment necessary on it, all bells and whistles, etc., etc. And he was working in a village, at the edge of a village in North Cork. And he said when the field he was working in was right next to the primary school. And when he was working there, only one child came to the fence to look at the tractor and baler. And he said he compared that with, say, 10 or 15 years ago, when there would have been maybe 20 or 30 young lads standing there. There was one solitary child. And he went home to his wife and he said, I nearly felt sorry for him. The interest is completely changed.
And what about the boom on the construction side here? Is that impacting on the farm contractor?
It's definitely drawn some people away. Some people will move out of agricultural contract work into construction work, because we have a boom, and it's evident, in any of the big cities around the country. We don't have major infrastructural work like roadworks going on, but we have plenty of other stuff going on, and that certainly draws some operators with skills attached to it. It's slightly different skill set in some senses. It is drawing people a little bit away. So what we probably need to do, and what we'd like to see, is that the skill of the driver, the machine driver, the skill attached to operating a baler, the skill attached to operating a combine, etc. And we've discussed it with our European counterparts. We'd like to see that raised to a new level, that there's a European certificate to acknowledge their skills, and that gives them freedom to move throughout Europe, but it also gives them a little bit more pride in the skill.
I suppose we can't ignore payment rates as well, and the seasonal nature of the work. Anecdotally, people would say, the contractors offer about €100 a day, but depending on the day, whether it's a fine day or a wet day, you don't know whether you're going to have work, and that day could go on for maybe 18 hours, which makes that €100 maybe sound less enticing. Are there problems there in terms? How would you describe the issue of payment rates? Is that a disincentive?
It's not an easy one to answer in a sense, because what we traditionally in the industry, what drivers were quoted was a net rate into their hand. So when the contractor is employing a guy, traditionally they've been saying, for example, €500 a week or €600 a week or whatever the figure was as a net figure. And we need to move them away from it, mainly because the new payroll system that came in January requires, essentially real-time reporting of wage payment systems. But for example, to pay somebody €500 a week is costing the contractor about 750, somewhere between 730 and 750. And that's providing that the driver has maximised all his or her allowances. Now, in a situation where they don't maximise the allowances, the cost of the contractor is even higher. So if a contractor, or any other employer for that matter, quotes somebody a figure of €500 a week into your hand, you need to know how much that's going to cost you. So while that might appear as 12 or 13 or whatever euro per hour net into the guy's hand, it's in fact probably costing 17, 18 euro to contractor because of our tax system. So this year has made it people more aware of it, because the new payroll system, particularly as it applies to seasonal workers, has been a bit of a challenge for a lot of people.
The FCI have been looking for an extension to the work permit to allow seasonal operators to come in from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. Has that extension been granted? Have you made progress with that?
Well, it hasn't been granted, and there's been a working group set up to discuss it and to look at opportunities and look what's necessary, look to see what can be done on it. We've had, the system as such is that a driver from another country can come in here on a holiday type visa, but it's quite strict in terms of making sure that the person does have a holiday component to it. The reason it kind of comes into focus is that a lot of Irish guys go to New Zealand in particular, but also to Australia. But for us, what's significant about it is because drivers from Australia, New Zealand in particular, and from South Africa are using very similar technology to what we are. It's not like the dairy industry where you bring in a guy to milk cows, and essentially he's walking from where he lives to the milking parlour and back twice a day. That's not what we can't put a guy up on a tractor and a baler and send him out to the countryside, without having some knowledge of the language, without understanding the machines already working them. So the farm system is very similar in New Zealand to what we have here. We have a lot of Irish guys going to New Zealand in the off season. They have a lot of that experience, and we are saying perhaps we can replicate it in the reverse and get some New Zealand guys with experience in it. But I have to say, it's a little bit more difficult because, for example, if I went to New Zealand tomorrow morning, my employer could get me a van or a car to drive around to see it. But in New Zealand, for example, and not to complicate it too technically, if you buy a car, your insurance is deducted from the price of your fuel. Whereas here, if I was the employer, I would have to insure this guy or girl from New Zealand. So my insurance cost alone could be 2,000. So it's not, we're not comparing like with like. It is a challenge. Some people have done it, but the skills are there.
So in the short term, the solution is to look outside Ireland. Finally, Mike, just one quick question on, you obviously represent not just the farm sector, but the forestry sector. There's a lot more drive there in terms of expansion on planting. In the future, do you see a lot of opportunities there on forestry contracting side? Is that an area that's opening up?
It is an area that's opening up. We also have to be aware of the fact that we haven't achieved our planting targets. So while the desire is to plant more forestry, if we look at 2018, for example, we were well below the targets that were set by the department. And, and in some areas, there's local dissension. People are not really happy to have whole areas of forest. For example, the Leitrim situation is very obvious. Yes, there are opportunities, and there should be opportunities for contractors for work in the non-season, in other words, mainly to do with thinning type work, etc. And some are already actively involved in it. But to go to the higher scale where you have forwarders, forestry harvesting machines, the investment involved is very significant. And therefore you'd need large areas. But currently at the moment, the biggest customer is Coillte, which is a state body. And in a sense, they dominate the market in terms of they engage most of the contractors and they pay them. And it's not exactly an equal type arrangement in terms of customer and contractor arrangement.
Okay, Mike, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thanks very much for joining us.